Do you want to play a tabletop RPG like Dungeons & Dragons or Savage Worlds, but you have no group to play with? Well, I'm here to tell you that you can have just as much fun playing these RPGs on your own. What is solo role-playing? Solo role-playing is when you play a tabletop RPG by yourself. This is when you don't have any other players and you don't have a game master. Now, you may be wondering, how do you do this? Well, instead of having a game master who you ask questions to, you will roll randomly on a collection of tables to decide what happens. For example, if you're wanting to enter a room, usually you would ask the game master, is the door locked? But instead, you'll roll on a table or do some other kind of action, such as drawing from a deck of cards that has been made before. The table you roll on will tell you whether or not the door is locked. Now, the benefits of this is that you can pick any setting you want to play in. You don't have to stick with what your group wants to do. If you want to play in a fantasy setting, you can just go ahead and play in that fantasy setting. If you want to play in a science fiction setting, you can go ahead, jump in a rocket ship and go and fly away. Instead of a game master deciding the difficulty of a skill check, it'll be you deciding the difficulties of rolls. And if you want to be fair on yourself, you can also roll these on tables as well. So, what do you actually need to play a solo RPG? Number one, you need an actual game system that you want to play. For example, that could be, as we've mentioned before, Dungeons & Dragons. But it could also be Call of Cthulhu, it could also be Apocalypse World, it could also be Dungeon World, it could be Blades in the Dark. Any system that you are interested in, you can just pick up and play in a solo RPG. Number two, you need a Game Master emulator. Now, there won't be a Game Master to answer your questions. So you will need a system or a process that will do it for you. So you need what we call a Game Master emulator, something that plays the role of the Game Master in your game. And this can take on many forms. It can be a system of random tables. It can be, if you're playing a board game, it can be a solitaire chart that you follow the rules of. It can be a deck of cards that you draw the cards from. My favourite is the Mythic GM emulator by Tana Pigeon. And the other one I recommend is Ironsworn by Sean Tompkins. In Ironsworn, the GM emulator is built into the game system itself. If you stick to the end of this video, I will show you where you can learn much more about both of these systems. So you may be asking, if you're playing by yourself, how is this any different from just writing a book? After all, when you write a book, you make characters, you make them do things. You don't have any other complication from other people doing their own things. In my opinion, that's not really a fair criticism. First of all, when you're writing a book, unless you're discovery writing it, then you will probably make an outline of the plot. When you're playing a solo RPG, you don't know what the plot is going to be. As we say when we're playing Powered by the Apocalypse games, we play to find out what happens. In a solo RPG, it's entirely possible that the protagonists fail without you knowing. And that's the second reason why it's different from writing a book. The situations in these games can get very intense and quite heroic. When you're writing a book, you know what your protagonists are going to do. When you're playing a solo RPG, you don't know what your protagonist is going to do. You don't know if they're going to succeed, and you don't know if they're going to fail. And so that means that you're always on the edge of your seat. When your character actually gets in there and succeeds, you get a sense of relief and excitement. Also, you can just get started. You just have to pick a solo RPG, you have to pick an emulator, you have to pick a starting situation for your character, make that character, and then you can just go. And lastly, you don't have to work as hard to create conflict, because the conflict will happen by itself. If you're writing a book, you need to add conflict. You need to make sure characters fail and they can't proceed, because otherwise, unless you're writing a fanfiction power fantasy, conflict is what people love in a story. When you're playing a solo RPG, you will make rolls and you will fail those rolls. The answers to the questions won't always go in your favor. You will draw the wrong card from the top of the deck. You will make a bad roll on a random table. The conflict will happen by itself. And that sort of leads to all of the other things. You can just get started. You don't need to outline conflict. You can play to find out what happens. You see what the plot and the conflict is, and as I said before, it's very intense and very heroic. There are multiple GM emulators out there, and no doubt many more will be made in the future when more people find out about this hobby. If you want to learn more about the Mythic GM emulator, you can click on this video over here, and if you want to learn about Ironsworn, you can click on this video over here. If you enjoyed this, critically hit that like button and comment down below about your thoughts on playing a solo RPG solo. Have a great day.